Ja, vi tenker på hverandre. Baby, I love you.
Okay.
Ha det.
Ha det.
Brian, there's this concern as we try to grow subscriber bases, or as different people, different streaming companies try to expand their user base. Do you continue to raise prices? What do you prioritize? Either increasing subscribers or increasing revenues? How is Disney doing on that front, given that they came in with a pretty disappointing projection of just growth?
Well, here's the thing. They can continue to raise prices and still grow subscribers on a year-over-year basis. And I think they'll continue to do so as other services will when they raise prices. The problem is that money is coming out of traditional pay TV. I published something on my Substack this past week pointing out that there's about $100 billion of spending in the United States, at least, by consumers on pay TV services, now declining in terms of actual spending. That's $100 billion of money that can go into these streaming services still, but it's going to come out of pay TV.
Where is sports in 5 years, Brian? Disney has a huge effect on sports with ESPN. I get it. But where is the Brian Weezer view on sports entertainment in 5 years?
Yeah, it'll still be super important. I mean, but Bob Iger at least was wise enough to point out that there is an inevitability to ESPN in particular eventually having its flagship service as a streaming service. The reality is that not everyone needs to watch everything that's on ESPN or on traditional TV for sports. So it may end up being a little bit more nichey, maybe
Shorta
not
mer.
as ubiquitous as it has been historically in the United States.
I look at Disney and I look at a creative guy as well. Is there a lot of cost cutting to do? Is Disney, and for that matter, other companies like it, is there a lot of fat there to cut, or are they bare bones right now?
You know, they talk certainly about containing their increases in spending on content, and it's hard to say what that is. I mean, certainly there's a great story in the journal about what's happening for Paramount
Det
called
danske, du kan bare se på
so that's a good example.
Ja,
Maybe
skru nå etterpå.
a bit
Tror
extreme
du det blir det
in terms
short
of
Nasdaq i
spending,
dag?
but
Ja.
I think in general
Den
that
shorten som vi gjorde i går på
if you
Nasdaq,
spend more money on programming, you will get more viewers.
den
They
shorten vi gjorde i går
will
på
continue to
Nasdaq,
grow their
kommer til å
platform,
bli bra i dag.
streaming platform, as long as they continue to increase their
Folk
spending
skjønner ikke noe. Nå
overall on
kommer det
programming.
PPI-tall etterpå da.
Obviously, they need good editorial
Vi gjorde det
choice.
jævlig bra i går. Altså, jeg dro inn så mye penger i går før jeg dreit meg på close. Jeg dro inn totalt i går, så realiserte jeg nesten 39 000.
If anyone goes anywhere near
Jeg
social
hadde
media, they'll see a discussion
14
of the
000,
writers'
og så realiserte jeg
strike in
39
Hollywood,
000.
a whole host of different streaming networks, and I wonder
Og så
how
tapte
dovetailed
jeg,
these ideas are. This idea that
masse
writers want to get paid, that
på
content
close.
wants to get rewarded given the years of largesse, and the networks just aren't willing at this time. How much
Hvordan
is
gjorde
it
hva?
a persistent battle based on
Trade
the
i går?
that we've been talking about?
Yeah, I worry about that because
Jeg hadde kanskje, jeg dro 39 laks i går, og så tappte jeg alt unntatt 3000 kroner på close. Jeg shorta på close. Jeg tradet bare med 2 og 5 kontrakter 100 ganger i går. Jeg dro inn flere tusen i timen. Ja, ja, 200 ganger giring.
It's all shifting towards the far less profitable business of streaming. So
Jeg treffer på nesten alt, ikke for å skryte jeg gjør det, jeg treffer på nesten alt. Og så det verste som var i går, at jeg sa på close i går, så sa jeg, det kan gå rett opp på close, for jeg har gjort det hver dag, men jeg tror ikke folk er så tjukke i huet. Skulle bare hørt på meg selv.
To Google, to Facebook or Meta, to all of these other social media.
Skulle bare hørt på meg selv. Så i dag så skal jeg høre på meg selv. Jeg skal ikke handle på close. Tok meg pauser klokka 11. Skal trade i 2 timer etterpå. Ferdig. Hvis jeg bare kan trade, så tjener jeg penger hver jævla dag. Bommer nesten aldri. Bank i bordet. Jo,
at least.
Men
slowly.
trading,
There's a lot of new
trading
players.
går
You're
fint.
seeing a lot
Det er
of
når du
growth.
kjører bets
Uber,
på
that platform, Walmart.
Kjører bets på tall.
Right.
Det er ikke trading.
Brian, thank you.
Kjører bets
Brian
på
Deuce
close.
from
Det er ikke
Madison
trading.
with an update
Da er det
there
en
on,
bet.
Streaming and the lack of profit out there. He's 67 years old. Had a
Når
good
du kjører en bet på close eller bet før PPI-tallene, det er ikke trading. Det er sånn, det er gambling.
Of James Diamond. He's summa cum laude out of Tufts and critically wandered through Harvard Business School with a guy named Immelt, Steve Burke of Comcast, the great investor Seth Klarman as well, and slid out among that talent is a Baker scholar at HBS. And I just
Så nå kommer det 12 klokka...
about it. Maybe it's
Når
his
kommer
own
12?
fault. He
Når kommer
downplays
tall nå?
what he had to put up with Sandy Well years ago. But this is a guy, as chairman and CEO of the bank, and we all hang on his annual letter, which was out a number of weeks ago.
In fairness, it's not as if he hasn't been incredibly
2.30.
successful. He does
Så
get
egentlig nå
compensated
skal ikke jeg handle, skal vente til etter 2.30. For nå kan det gå like med opp som ned. Så det her nå er ikke helt bra.
Of JP Morgan, seeing it through a whole host of different times that harken back to some of the roll-ups that you're talking about in the banking sector today.
I'm going to frame out in the annual letter, and like one letter a couple years ago, he could tell he was really upset about people don't understand it's just the day-to-day executive grind of hard work, you know, the romance of 18-hour days and living on planes and the rest of it. And this year was much more of a strategic response of this is where banking fits in his words, as an essential part of the American economy. And these are real sensitivities. To me, with Francine, it's the angst out there, really going back to JP Morgan in the mansion, I believe it was in 1912, or excuse me, the panic of 1907, where basically JP Morgan wrote the check to save the nation. But this idea that you go through our banking history and now there's this absolute dominance of JP Morgan and Bank of America in terms of size, even against the other ones we follow all the time.
Over the past decade, we've been talking about, or a lot of people have been decrying, big banks as utilities, not having the same kind of profit engines as they used to because they can't take as much risk. And this has been the year where people reward banks for being utilities, for being safe, stable revenue drivers that do withstand some of the pressures that we're not seeing at the likes of PacWest or First Republic or some of the other banks that have seen some serious distress. At what point does that model, that fortress of strength, that fortress of diversification, that fortress of trillions of dollars of deposits create something that people just hunker down as a sort of safe asset rather than something that's going to be more volatile with the economic cycle?
Even with the pullback in JP Morgan that you've seen, nothing like what we've seen in other banks. I'm going to give them a gentleman's roundup here. The statistic off the Bloomberg is 12.96% per year over the last 10 years. Can we round that up to 13% just so Francine can get through the interview?
And how much of this, as they gather deposits from all of the banks that are losing them? I mean, we talked about them gaining
Tom
deposits.
Satoris was clear this could happen again. It's not over.
And just to repeat the news, PacWest deposits dropping 9.5% in a week, mostly over 2 days after some negative news.
In 15 minutes, a conversation with Mr. Diamond of JP Morgan, Francine Lacroix in Paris. Really looking forward to that. In 30 minutes, claims. We continue to look at the labor economy of America. Stay with us. Worldwide, Bloomberg surveillance.
So most actors are thrilled if they have one part like Rocky in their whole career. Yeah. You had another one, Rambo. Yeah. Now, Rambo was not something you created, is that right?
No, Rambo was a novel by David Morrell. And I was the 11th choice. Everyone, it was like, I don't know who was next after me because they had gone through everyone. And it passed, including 3 different directors. So this had become sort of a pariah of sorts. The first time we go in there, Rambo was, in the original screenplay, was horrible. He was a psychopath. He killed children, he killed fishermen, this and that. So I said, if I'm gonna get involved with this, I see the character going on beyond this. And they said, what do you wanna do? I said, I wanna rewrite the screenplay. And I want him to go right to the edge of violence, right to the point where he's being pushed, but he pulls back because, similar to James Dean in East of Eden, he wanted to be accepted back into the family of man.
So if Rambo got in a fight with Rocky, who would win?
Rambo.
Rambo.
Easy. Not
Because
even a fight. Unless it's in a ring. See, first of all, Rambo is a killer, for real. He's almost a psychopath when that switch flips. Rocky is a good guy. You know, he has mercy. The other one has no mercy.
From the world of politics to the world of business. Every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, hosts Anne-Marie Hordern and Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lines deliver news, insight, and analysis live from Bloomberg's Washington headquarters. Get the latest from and about politics' biggest power players at the end of every trading day. Balance of Power, every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, only on Bloomberg, your global business authority.
For the first, call it 18 years at Chipotle, this was you come into Chipotle along the line, you interact with the crew, and you customize your meal. We've got this separate make line, and it's digitized, and so the orders come in, and they're really kind of staged so that if you say at noon, I want to come in at 1 o'clock, we hold that order, and we will send it to the crew like maybe 10 to 1,
Right.
so it's ready right when you pull up your car.
How do you manage these kind of two different staffing needs, right? And
Yes.
making sure you have the right amount of people
Yes.
at the right time.
We spend a lot of time projecting sales. A lot of it is, it's part art, part science. We're trying to bring more science and more AI into it.
Yeah.
Because if you get the right sales projection, then you know
tog
exactly what
in
your,
i snart.
what your staffing needs to be. So if you get the sales right, you can get the entire restaurant staffed perfectly with just a couple people.
Jeg er så
Our
hater.
average restaurant now does about over $1 million per restaurant in digital sales.
Bloomberg has enhanced search on the terminal to deliver what you need when you need it.
Ute.
Now,
Boom,
you can simply type
boom, boom,
phrases
boom.
in
Made
everyday
money, made
English
more
in the
money.
command line. Compare financials. Find people. Analyze markets. You can enter phrases or ask questions. What do you want to know today? Ask a question or visit SearchGo to find answers now.
We're in an environment where inflation is still pretty sticky, well above what the central banks really want.
The market has given a lot of credence to the Fed in their credibility to bring inflation down.
You better be sure that when you stop, you're not going to look back and regret just a couple months later.
They're still focused on inflation. That has to be number one.
We were not in recession in the first quarter. We're probably not going to be in recession in the second quarter.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene, Jonathan Farrow, and Lisa Abramowitz.
30 minutes away from economic data in the U.S., 12 minutes away from a conversation with the CEO of J.P. Morgan. It is Thursday. Welcome back. This is Bloomberg Surveillance live on Bloomberg Television and Radio. Tom Keene, Jonathan Farrow, and Lisa Abramowitz. John is off. He is probably going to be back tomorrow. That is the rumor. We do get this economic data, and we will get to Jamie Dimon and that interview that Francine Lacroix is doing in about 15 minutes' time. But there is a question with the economic data of where we are and whether we will see that creeping higher of unemployment as inflation stays high.
Let's get sobered up. When did we first hear about recession? It's coming.
Well, we heard about it for about a year.
You're like for a year or
exactly.
even longer. United Kingdom, recession's coming. Oops, Citigroup, Giannakis with that great reversal a couple days ago. I think Bank of England read the Citigroup note and they reversed it today.
Well, and the fact that they came out and they actually increased the projections for GDP growth, the most on record from a recession to now expansion for 2 consecutive years, highlights the conundrum that everyone's having. Do you stay negative? Do you stay conservative, whether you're an investor or whether you're a corporate executive like Jamie Dimon? Do you stay conservative amid the uncertainty and the upside surprise to economic growth?
Guest earlier from the United Kingdom saying, look, we just got housing wrong. Housing's been more resilient than the collapse that was looked at. And I'm going to take a note from James Dimon. He put a Wall Street Journal op-ed he wrote into the annual letter that he did. The West needs America's leadership. And I'm going to suggest part of that leadership is this insatiable American exceptionalism. It's changed. It's morphed over the years. There's been some ugly moments. But the bottom line is Dimon is channeling the growthiness of the American message versus some of the more austere messages that are out there.
Yeah, and at a time when U.S. growth is perhaps not quite keeping pace with other areas, and I say Europe and China in particular, where it's outpacing almost more
from
for
a
the
lower
first time,
base.
from a lower base
Cut 'em
without
some
a date.
slack.
But it's the question here is, where are the opportunities? Are they in the U.S.? Because globally, we have seen more and more move to Europe, move to China, move
Right.
elsewhere, where growth potentially could be increasing at a faster pace.
Where's their technology business? I don't see the academic input that you see coming, frankly, from other places. And frankly, continental Europe's got some real burgeoning technologies, but not like the major tech companies of America.
I wonder how much of that is just a reluctance to try and fail. In the point that, for example, we saw some headlines about Europe pushing back on artificial intelligence and ChatGPT for concerns, and we see this kind of headline going around. Heading into all of that, you're getting no certainty in markets. And I think that is really notable to me right now. In equities, before we get to the yield space, in equities, just nothing, absolutely nothing, basically range bound, 4,147 on the S&P, looking at 0.1% decline.
You don't quote the Dow?
No, I mean, I've been trained well. I'm going to stay out of that argument. I'm going to basically just try to
Du blir
indexing.
over natta så blir du liquidated. Så du burde ikke sitte med så masse ordre over natta. Med tight stop, I hvert fall.
Especially after the Bank of England, inflation still coming in high. Even yesterday, people cheering the CPI report, and yet Vincent Reinhardt saying one report does not make a trend. It doesn't make sense that you're pricing in rate cuts, and yet here we are.
We have to get to Megan Horniman, but Lisa, I'm sorry, to 4 digits, 3.8578%. We are now 15 full basis points in on the 2-year yield in a long cup of Sanka. I mean, it's amazing how we've moved.
Yes, and at the same time, the volatility.
Vurderer å ta gevinster nå, for jeg vil ikke sitte over tallene og ta en sånn der gambling som jeg gjorde i går.
How do you get any stability given some sort of risk?
Jeg tappte jo på å sitte over tallene.
Joining us now to discuss as we head into a really important hour, Megan Horniman, Chief Investment Officer at Veriden's Capital Advisors. Megan, as we look for the data in the U.S. in a half an hour time, how much are you expecting it to really represent the strength, the resilience that so many people are rejecting right now as simply a passing phenomenon?
Yeah, I think that there is some inconsistency in what we're seeing from whether it's the labor market showing strength, but then there's really.
Jeg tjener så mye penger på å trade, så ikke vits å gamble. Det bare tull.
Whether you look at manufacturing or you look at housing, all of these things are suggesting that we're headed towards a downturn. And then you take into account the Federal Reserve tightening cycle and then the tighter lending conditions. These things are going to start to filter into data, not right away, but we think in the rest of this year.
Megan, I want to go to your heritage. Legg Mason in Baltimore, all the great value house action of Legg Mason, on to Deutsche Bank is a substantial East Coast competitor to JP Morgan. We're going to talk to Jamie Dimon here in about 9 minutes. He's salvaging our banking crisis as it is. Is he going to have to do more from where Verdant sits?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think the regional side of the banking crisis is over. I do think that the bigger banks are going to have to step in and do more. What's changed? If you look at over the past couple of weeks since he came in and rescued the last bank, nothing's changed from a regulatory standpoint. Nothing's changed from the Federal Reserve. One thing that's changed is that the Federal Reserve has said, hey, we're not going to see rate cuts right away. So the pressure that was on the small and mid-cap banks earlier this year with higher interest rates and taking losses there, that still is the case. And that's going to be a problem for these banks. So in the absence of knowing anything that's changed, I don't think that unfortunately is over. So I think there's going to be more to come.
You have the advantage of not being Manhattan-based. How does commercial real estate look like for Verdant's Capital? I mean, I know it's off your remit, but what is all the analysis you see that you listen to on CRE?
It's something that we're concerned about. I don't think that it's being talked about enough. Obviously, we're concerned just because of a slowing economy and higher vacancies, but then the double effect on that is that we have higher interest rates, and then you throw on top of that we have this maturity wall. That's where the big
Det helt ute. Tatt gevinst på Nasdaq, tatt gevinst på Daxen. Tjent fra staten nå, så har dratt inn litt rundt 3000 kroner.
As well as in a situation where you have tighter lending conditions.
That's an area
Det
of
er cirka 3000 kroner.
strength that
Ja,
we can
ferdig.
get a better sense of in about 20 minutes time is when we get the PPI, the factory
Kommer tall nå om 20 minutter.
that comes out in the US. It's expected to be significantly
Kommer tall om
below
20 minutter.
CPI, that sort of
De
headline
tallene må vi
consumer
bare se.
figure, which is being captured as profits at a lot of companies that are actually increasing their profit margins at a time when people expected them to shrink for them to absorb some of the inflation against some pushback by consumers. Is this giving you optimism to go into certain stocks, to go into certain credit?
No, unfortunately, at this time, I think that that's probably short-lived. The consumer is weak. We've seen that in some of the recent data, and we've also seen that with the fact that they're relying a lot more on credit card debt. They're not.
Jeg tjener penger hver dag på trading.
If you
Hver
looked at the
jævla dag.
CPI report yesterday, that showed that airfare is actually starting to come down. So you're starting to see some weakness in that part of the part of the economy that was consumers were really spending money on. So your leisure and hospitality. There's a lot of cracks surfacing. So I'm not optimistic that that businesses can continue to pass on those costs without it further hurting the consumers.
So are you basically in the camp that there is going to be this disinflation that will accompany the weakness that we see as it accelerates throughout the end of the year? Basically, what's been pushing everybody to keep going into bonds.
Yeah, I do think that we are going to be looking at, again, slowing inflation, a slowdown in the economy, most likely a recession. The inflation situation has been improving, and we can't deny that. But there still is a lot of work to go. The biggest inconsistency, and you mentioned that people are going into bonds, the biggest inconsistency that we see is that investors are pricing in rate cuts, and that's not something that we see. The Fed is not there. They don't have the ability to do that with inflation where it is. They can't come in with a stop-and-go approach, which is what they did in the 70s and 80s, which proved to be not the right thing to do. I think they're going to stay on hold. Interest rates will stay higher for longer. They've made it clear in their last meeting that they will sacrifice economic growth to achieve their goal of bringing inflation down. So I think the bond market's not necessarily pricing that in. Unfortunately, within bonds, I think the best place to be right now is just to park money in cash, have dry powder, take advantage of opportunities because they will arise in the second half of this year.
And then on equity markets, do you deploy that cash here, or do you just wait?
It depends on what we see from an equity standpoint. I think equities are similar to bonds. The equity market, specifically some of the high growth technology names, these are, I think, still too high from a price to earnings multiple. I think they have room to decline and kind of realize the fact that the Fed's not going to come in and save the day. They've been able to do that in the past. They're not able to do it this time around. So I think there's going to be some correction here in U.S. equities.
Megan, thank you so much. Megan Horniman there with Verdant's Capital Advisors this morning. I'm going to go back off J.P. Morgan Research as we wait for Mr. Diamond and just suggest I'm still thunderstruck by what his colleague Michael Ferroli said.
Du bør lage en video på hvordan du setter opp så. Takk.
And I remember at the time, it was groundbreaking when he and Bruce Kasman came out with that research. And the whole thrust of James Diamond's annual letter is a U.S. growth strategy. That's the entire, the theme, if you will, across it. And it comes back to Ferroli being at like a 1.85%, whatever, run rate for the American economy, and his boss saying that's just not acceptable.
Well, and at a time when a lot of companies have been betting on the United States, and that's paid off. I mean, think about Warren Buffett in that meeting that we just saw over there. There is going to be a real question, though, about what his broader strategy is, in particular expanding into places like China or, say, Europe at a time when there is more growth there, and that has been what's been leading a lot of the upside surprises.
What do you think of what Megan said, cash here? I mean, the gloom, not the gloom. It's so strange. I mean, futures 41.49 off fractionally, and yet we're getting research studies that say there's a fair amount of gloom out there, and you hear that with Megan in cash.
Well, and cash yields something, right? I mean, if you're getting 4 or 5% on cash, it's an asset class unto itself. People are expecting this to break in a negative way for the economy. We're at a place of inflection, really, where we've seen the growth, and now do we see the inflation go down with the accompaniment of growth also coming down?
18 minutes to economic data. And before that, Francine Lacroix in conversation with Jamie Dimon of J.P. Morgan, their chairman, their chief executive officer. Futures at -1, the VIX 17.24. Stay with us on radio, on television, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Keeping
Keeping you up to date with news from around the world with the first word, I'm Lisa Mateo. The Bank of England has raised its benchmark lending rate to the highest level since 2008, and it says that more increases may be needed if inflation persists. The central bank lifted its key rate a quarter point to 4.5%. Officials also delivered the biggest upgrade to growth projections since 1997, erasing a recession they had previously forecast. Donald Trump is urging Republican lawmakers to either get President Biden to agree to spending cuts or push the U.S. into its first ever default. The former president spoke in a town hall event with CNN in New Hampshire. He holds a tight grip on the Republican Party, and polls show him as a frontrunner for the party's presidential nomination. For a third day, Israel and Palestinian militants in the Gaza Strip exchanged fire. Islamic Jihad squads launched more than 500 rockets toward Israel. Meanwhile, Israeli aircraft killed the group's chief rocket maker in Gaza. Efforts to reach a ceasefire have not worked. Ukraine needs more time to launch its long-awaited counteroffensive against Russian forces, and that's according to President Volodymyr Zelensky. He told the BBC the army is still awaiting some promised aid from allies, such as armored vehicles. Shares of Disney are lower in pre-market trading. The world's largest entertainment company posted a drop in subscribers to its streaming service, Disney Plus, and it also predicted a bigger loss in that business in this quarter. And Disney says the loss from streaming will increase by $100 million because of shifting marketing costs. Global news powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Lisa Mateo, and this is Bloomberg.
A default is frankly unthinkable. America should never default. It would be tremendously economically and financially damaging.
The former chair of the Federal Reserve System, the Secretary of Treasury of the United States, Janet Yellen, in Tokyo, in Japan at the G7 meetings. Anne-Marie Horton in conversation with the Secretary of Treasury tomorrow, widely anticipated after a set of economic data. We do get economic data here in 15 minutes that could change the course of the view on her labor economy as well. Lisa Abramowitz and Tom Keene right now, and what we'd like to do is go to Paris, and it is a Paris of J.P. Morgan that is important. In World War I, I'm going to get the pronunciation wrong, and Francine Lacroix is going to correct me. It is 14 Place Vendôme, and it was the commitment of the J.P. Morgan Bank to France in the heat of World War I. She is joined in Paris with James Dimon, our Francine Lacroix. How was my pronunciation, Francine?
Oh, that's cool.
Tom, full marks for French pronunciation. You're almost French. I'm so excited for you. I'm delighted to be joined by Jamie Dimon, JP Morgan Chairman and Chief Executive Officer. Thank you for joining us. As always, debt ceiling or banking turmoil, what are you most worried about?
Here.
Hva kom nå?
Well, I think the debt ceiling is potentially catastrophic.
Yeah.
So that's a
Jeg har ikke noe ordre inne, hva kom nå?
You know, the banking crisis, I still believe, will kind of sort its way through. And it's not anything like 08 or 09. Only a couple of people are offsides with all these various things, which you knew about. So hopefully, you know, it's getting near the tail end of that.
But if you're Janet Yellen right now, what would you do differently?
I don't know. I think we need to finish the bank crisis. I think we've had uncertain policy on mergers, this First Horizon deal. I think we have to assume there'll be a little bit more. So, you know, whatever the FDIC, the OCC, the Federal Reserve, you know, whatever they need to do to make it better, they should do. Be thoughtful, be very forward-looking, you know, not be surprised constantly.
Well, I one of the
things we've known about for quite a while, and so we've handled three: SVB, Signature, First Republic, and so.
Yeah, so
but the
are you asking?
The regional banks.
Jeg har ingen ordre nå, da, men jeg vil gjerne vite hvorfor den gikk opp.
They're quite strong. You know, they're quite worried
Folk
because
gærne.
you know, run on deposits like that, but their financial results are good. Their financial results are going to be good, okay, next quarter. You know, their earnings.
Det noe som kom nå. Jeg ringte som vet hva det var for noe. Det noe som kom nå. Det ikke en bevegelse helt utover blå.
So if you're asking Janet Yellen to get the job done, what does that look like, that solution?
I'm not asking for a solution.
Why not?
Just be prepared for problems. we don't need a comprehensive solution.
What do we need right now? Do we need regulators
Hvilket tall
to
kom
look
nå?
at short sellers of banks?
Yes. Look, my folks would tell me that that's not the problem, the short selling ban. If you actually analyze stocks and short sales, doesn't seem that big a deal. I think they may partially
Den her skjønte jeg ingenting av.
because, as you know, some people are unscrupulous and they use other means.
TPI-tallene kommer jo ikke nå.
I think that but if you look at the detail, the SEC has
Det kommer klokken 2:30.
enforcement capability to look at what people are doing by name in options, derivatives, short sales. And they should go, if someone's doing anything wrong, people in collusion or people going short and then making a tweet about a bank, they should go after them. And vigorously, and they should be punished to the full extent the law allows it. So I think it's possible it's taking place. We have no evidence of it, but my experience in life has been don't assume too much.
Do you think that they're looking into it?
I hope so. I don't know.
When you look at some of the position of JP Morgan, of course, you didn't really buy any long-dated bonds, and at the time,
Satt du lång, så bra.
stop hoarding cash. Do you think regulators and investors had pushed some of these banks to take unwarranted risk?
Yes, I
Jeg
do.
får så shorte på
To
den
be
nå.
clear, the people to blame are the bank CEOs and
Men nå kommer det
bank
tall,
boards
da.
and things like that. Having said that, I think there's been a humility on the part of regulators that the Federal Reserve itself never forecast interest rates going up. Not one Fed governor forecast it, and whether you forecast it or not, you should be stress testing people for it. Their stress tests always had low rates. We always knew about uninsured deposits, and there were huge incentives that banks to put securities in held to maturity, lower capital requirements. Huge incentives to own treasuries, lower capital requirements, and they counted for liquidity. And I'm hoping
Jeg skal ligge unna. Jeg skal vente til tallene. Jeg skal ikke gamble. Jeg faen om det går opp og ned. Jeg driter i det. Jeg skal vente til
Not a
tallene går
regulation
ned.
problem, it's a supervision problem.
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. They become very related.
Jeg skal ikke gjøre noe. Jeg skal ikke ta en sjanse. Venter til tallene kommer. Får gå hvor det vil. Fy faen. Går det long, går det long. Går det short, går det short. Folkens, venter.
When you have one stress test and you have a company completely focused on that for 3 months, does it lull people in a false sense of security that all these other things aren't going to happen? And all these other things in history always happen. And so I think it was a little bit of a mistake to have one stress test. I'm not asking them to do many at this level of detail, but our stress test is 200,000 pages long. Do you think that last 100,000 pages added value? And my view is it did not.
Do you think but things will change because of this? Is this like a catalyst?
I think it's going to get worse for banks. I think that
What do you
people...
mean by worse?
It's just more regulations and more rules.
Det er jævla smart skolpus å ha de reglene. Hadde jeg holdt meg til reglene mine i går, så hadde jeg faen meg ikke blåst bort. Hallo?
But if you overdo
Hallo?
certain rules, requirements, regulations, some of these community banks
Ja.
have more compliance people
Ja.
than loan officers. And so at one point, you make
Ja.
it harder for them to do business. There are already hundreds of rules in place, and in
Ja.
a lot of ways, it's to mix the rules. If you're going to change liquidity, maybe not
Ja.
capital. If you're going to change capital, maybe not liquidity. If you're going to add TLAC, then maybe you should do something with
Ja.
deposit insurance. They should sit down and have a very thoughtful conversation about what
Ja.
those things are and what we want the outcome to be.
Ja.
If you look at the present outcome, a lot of things are leaving banks, and they should.
Ja.
I'm not. And if that's what they want, so be it.
Når
That
da?
should be done with the forethought. That should not be done because you're just putting rules and regulations in place and you don't know the
La meg
consequences.
svare på etterpå, for jeg skal sjekke for et bryllup eller noe. Jeg vet ikke hvilken helt det er.
80% of banks today, and just be careful about what you wish for.
So you bought First Republic.
Jo, jeg kan gi deg svar etterpå. Jeg vet det etterpå.
What's inside it? What did you find out?
Ja.
Yeah, no, we had to go look before we bought it.
Konge, da ringer jeg etterpå.
That's reassuring.
Det
But
da.
anything
Ha det.
that you found
We
out
had
since?
800 people working around the clock for a long time to look at something like that. And in reality, look, they did some things really well. Like if you talk to their customers, I'm getting calls and emails and great culture, great customers and things like that. Their credit is kind of pristine. That's good. So of course we marked all the market and we're all in very good shape. We've hedged all the interest rate exposure together. We've got thousands of people now going out and learning about what their best.
Bruk opp, da, ikke
best
folk
of all,
gjerne.
not the kind of company that comes in our way or the highway, and so there's no surprise there. It had to make sense for shareholders, but this notion that it was an unbelievable thing. No, it was a nice thing for shareholders. That's I have to do that. But we also really did it to assimilate the banking in a way that's very safe for the system, and it didn't cost uninsured depositors, it didn't cost the FDIC. It cost the FDIC as little as possible. But I also want to point out, I'd be fine if they want to change the rules a little bit to make it easier for a regional bank to buy a big bank. And the other thing about big banks, which again is, I know, but the thing about big banks, we need healthy big banks. We have the best banking system in the world. you know, and you want
You're
that.
very big.
Yeah, but we're not. Banks are becoming smaller and smaller as a part of the global system. So when they look at banks, they say, oh, it's big. But when you look at the banking system to the system, mortgages have left, a lot of private credits left, certain trading functions have left. A lot of things are going to leave. You have Apple, you have the neobanks, you better be a little more thoughtful about when you say we mean banking per se. And so.
But the U.S., the Americans should not fear too much finance consolidation in your hands.
No, because you know most of our size accrues to our clients. So if you look at, you know, we do small banks can't do. We do like banking large corporations in 50 countries around the world and move $10 trillion a day. You know, it's hard. So these are big complex things. We're not big and complex as we want to be. We're big and complex because the people we serve are big and complex. We bank countries, the World Bank. You know, we do a lot of things. And yes, we also bank consumers in the United States. So, but I want the community banks to thrive. I mean, like I said, we want to do everything we can to help them. We didn't want this to happen. We didn't cause it to happen. The second it happened, we knew it was bad for all banks. And
are you too big to fail?
I don't know what that word means anymore.
Jeg synes det går short at det spruter ut av meg, liksom.
But we certainly didn't mean it to be an advantage. Like, so, you know, we've asked all our people when this crisis happened, I don't want any.
Jeg har så lyst til å gå short.
Any client,
Helvete.
any banker from any bank is, you know, regional bank or community bank, etc. So.
Is there anything else?
Jeg var klar til å shorte her oppe, men jeg tør ikke gjøre det på grunn av tallet.
That's it.
No, I mean we're gonna have a lot of blowback on having bought this one, but it was the right thing to do. You know, but we'll get the blowback. But again, my job, people at this thing, they always look at like the financial deal. Forget the financial deal. 800 people working around the clock. 10,000 people deployed now to consolidate systems, risk, fraud, credit, payments, branches, real estate, vendors, technology. It's a lot of work, you know, and it distracts us from those other things. And so, like I said, we did it. It was marginally beneficial for shareholders. It was good for the system, but. And you know, now we have to be prepared for the other side of that mountain.
How worried are you about the debt ceiling? So Donald Trump yesterday in a town hall with CNN, A, did not seem too worried, and 2, actually told Republicans to stick to their guns.
Well, one more thing he doesn't know very much about. Let me put it in 2 categories. One is actual default. That is potentially catastrophic. And you can go through a million ways, but anyone knows that's potentially catastrophic. And I don't think it's going to happen because it gets catastrophic. And the closer you get to it, you will have panic. And so the closer you get, you have markets get volatile. Maybe the stock market go down. The treasury markets will have their own problems. It's amazing you already have certain T-bills trading 3% and right next to them 5%. This is not good. And people should remember the American financial system is the foundation to the global economic system. And so. And the closer we get, the more panic. We might get downgraded. The last time we were downgraded, we had like 65 or 70% debt to GDP.
Ja.
Now it's 105. Now our deficits are 2 or 3 times that.
Kom send det på SMS, skal man sende det til riktig
we better
vedkommende,
be
hvis du tror
very
jeg skal tro med.
careful. And I wish we didn't get there at all. I'm respectful of both sides, who, you know, one side wants to use it to make up for. We got jammed down their throats. You know, and I would love to get rid of the debt ceiling thing.
Det er flere. Det er ikke én person som pakker mat, lager mat, sender ut svar og alt mulig. Så hvis du ikke får svar på kundesupport, så må jeg sende det til riktig på kundesupport. Det er de som jobber der.
It's a really bad idea because panic becomes something that is not good. And it can affect
Nei, jeg har ikke hørt om at det er en største
But yes, at the end of the day,
det er fikse. Så hvis det er noe som du vil skal bli gjort, så fikser det. Bare send det til riktig vedkommende.
And the other thing about markets is always remember panic is the one thing that scares people. Like they take irrational decisions.
Det er ikke noe problem. Da bare sender du et par på SMS med navn og ordnummer, så fikser det.
At 40% of what they would be worth if we had a Great Depression. But they were like, I want out, I want cash, I'm not betting my family's money on this or my company's money. People will panic, and again, we got to be very careful about getting close to a situation that causes that.
Did you get a call from Janet Yellen about this?
I'm not going to talk about personal calls I'm getting. We've all spoken about debt ceiling. I mean, everyone. That's everyone. There's no.
But for big banks, are you ready? Actually, how do you prepare for a possible?
We have a group of people who are very smart. We're looking at. Again, it's very unfortunate. It's time-consuming. Hopefully, it won't happen, but it affects contracts, collateral, clearinghouses, clients. It affects clients differently around the world. You have to then anticipate what people are going to do, which is very different than the legality of it. And you know, and the closer we get, the more those. Kind of that war room will start. Now it's taking place once a week, but my guess is sometime call it May 21st, it'll be every day. and then it'll be 3 times a day. And then it'll be much more conversation with clients about what they need to do to help get them through it and things like that. It's very unfortunate. It should never happen this way.
I mean, Fortress Diamond is always about the balance sheet. Should there be a special commission looking at debt in the U.S. that you should run?
Oh, God, no.
Why not?
I don't want to.
On China, they went after tech. They're looking now at finance. What kind of message does it tell companies that want to do business there?
Well, I think when you say they're looking at finance, it's been very limited. They've been very much more careful about touching the financial system or outsiders. But look, this is a serious subject. And anything that relates to national security, I'm a patriot first, and I'm going to salute my government. So put that aside. What the government should do, and wants to do, and is now saying they are going to do, is have conversations. They're going to be tough, but they should be thoughtful. Certain things are really national security, certain things are not. You know, and we shouldn't confuse the two. America and China have a lot of common interests: climate, nuclear proliferation, terrorism, global stability. You know, and we have differences. You know, we're capitalists; they're not. You know, and it's okay. We can sort it out, but we need to keep the Western alliances together, not just around war and Ukraine, but around strategic, economic relationships, including trade. We can't take trade off the table every time we talk to, Europe or Asia and stuff like that. So I would go back into TPP. I would surround the world. I want to keep the world safe for democracy, and I want to have open markets, particularly with Europe. And when I was here last time was when we passed IRA Act. A lot of great things in that act. But there are things I don't like too much social engineering inside of it, but also it pissed off all of our allies.
But on the China side, so if they start doing more noise on finance, does that hurt Chinese growth?
Probably. I think you've already seen.
Nå kom tallene.
You've seen investment going both
Hva var de tallene for noe? Var de bra, eller?
And that's okay in the short run, but in the long run, we should say and the government's got to decide.
Var de bra tall, eller?
Business companies decide.
Faen, det står penning hos meg. Var tallene bra?
Business sometimes. There may be truth to that.
Dårlig tall?
They have to decide. What is okay? What's not okay? What do they want? What's security?
Jeg har ikke, kan noen poste tallene til meg? Jeg får faen ikke den PC-en jeg klikker jeg på, ass.
Give you £1 million, or maybe you take it, your own £1 million. Where do you invest?
Unemployment claims 264 mot 245. 242.
Why?
I think there's too much. The amount of fiscal stimulus took place and still surging through the system, the amount of QE, these were extraordinary numbers, and not just in the U.S., but in Europe and in other parts of the world. And when I say extraordinary, I mean extraordinary. And therefore, I think there's a chance you have more inflation than people think. So while the Fed controls short rates, they don't completely control longer rates. And that you could see longer rates ticking up because of higher inflation. And even if there's a mild recession, they continue to tick up. A lot of us experienced that in the 70s and 80s, and I would be a little worried about that. So rates are kind of low, spreads are still kind of low.
Okay, so you're not putting them in sovereign. Where are you putting that million?
PP 0,2, 0,3, dormanted, unemployment claims 246, 264 mot 245 000.
I mean, the world seems a little bit odd. Like equities are doing one thing, but we keep on.
Ja og nei. Bearish. De som er positive vil tenke da at det kommer ikke til å kline over renten. Det er negativt. Jeg går short.
Home prices have gone up for 10 or 15 years.
Yeah, short.
Stock prices have gone up for 10 or 15 years. They have $1 trillion more in their checking accounts.
Du kan få folk som sier at det blir ikke rentekjøp. Du kan få folk som sier det. Men de vet ikke, de kan ikke makro. Da skal den ned.
So the bite of that is going to happen later this year, early next year. And the bite of QT hasn't happened yet. So if you have higher inflation, so I think it's a reasonable thing to say those things are coming to fruition.
Kan være at de tenker sånn. At du får brems på renteheving. Hvorfor sparker man opp på negativt? For folk skjønner ikke ting. Folk er tjukke i huet. Folk er dumme.
Russia, our relations with China, etc. And I always have to remind all of our public, America has a 75,000 per person GDP. China's is 15. We have all the food, water, and energy we want.
Det tar ofte 5 minutter for folk skjønner hva som skjer.
I mean, they're not a 10-foot giant and us a 4-foot pygmy. We have to manage ourselves better. I think we can grow more, we can be more thoughtful.
In the market, so a lot of people say
docs.
I mean, we talk about nothing else. Everybody knows that could break. Is there something that we're not seeing that could break?
I think it's amazing when you talk about markets that sometimes it's and the press sometimes like a bunch of birds flocking
At
to
folk
Wall Street.
kjøper noe er helt
Endless comments in that.
ubegripelig på de
Yes,
tallene.
that's an issue. So, you know, if you look at office real estate, in B and C real estate will probably have a problem. Chicago, New York, Portland, Seattle, but probably not Nashville, Tampa, Orlando, Miami, et cetera. So you got to be a little more thoughtful about it. And I think if I remember, banks have $600 billion of office commercial real estate. You know, they had a cushion, so even if it dropped in value, they still have equity in it. Maybe some of that will go bad, particularly if there's a recession. They're going to be okay. It may take a few banks down. That's normal stuff. That isn't abnormal. What is abnormal is
Shorta dobbelt. Jeg regner med at folk kan makro snart. Hvis ikke så gir jeg opp.
That is abnormal. I'm much more concerned about that than
the markets trade that. Right. If there's a big geopolitics, there's how do the markets talk then? Do that. Okay.
Look, if I was we're cautious. You know, I remind people, businesses aren't there to trade us sometimes. They're there to serve our clients, okay? And so we're going to serve our clients no matter what happens.
Yeah. James, very quickly, final question. How are you feeling about the Epstein deposition this month?
I am so sad that we had any relation to that
At
man.
ikke faller med en gang, hva er det folk driver med?
Lawyers are valuing this.
Bare, nei, er de dårlige, er de bra?
Obviously, had we known then, we know
Det er
today.
dritdårlig!
Done things differently, but it's very unfortunate, and I have deep respect for these women. That doesn't mean we're liable for the action of an individual, but I do have deep respect for them. My heart goes out to them.
Å nei, kanskje det er så dårlig at det ikke blir verre. Ja, da går økonomien bedre. Ja, men da kjøper vi. For det blir jo ikke verre enn det er nå. Nei, du kan gå konk, din jævla kamel. Jeg er short. Jeg er riktiggevinst. Jævla noobs. Skjønner du ikke en dritt. Folk er så tjukke i huet. Ja, nå kommer han. Han kommer ned nå etter 10 minutter. Da kommer han. Det er bare sånn, åja, det var dårlig likevel.
This morning. In the meantime, we have had a reaffirmation
Klart det er dårlig.
interest rates in the United States.
Nå tjener vi penger som faen her.
3.82 handle moments ago.
Jævla
That was
idioter.
over 4%, 2 cups of Sanka ago. Michael McKee and I grew up drinking Sanka.
Hva er det
He's
folk
here as
driver med?
International economics and Sanka correspondent for Bloomberg. And 2 days in a row off inflation and off of claims and PPI, the markets move.
Well, you
Faen,
have
er det
some
folk
good
driver
news
med?
on inflation.
Det er en fin gevinst da.
PPI, it doesn't have a direct relationship, as we've said very often, to CPI, but PPI comes in basically a little lower than anticipated, higher than last month, but on a year-over-year basis, it's down. Final demand up 0.2% compared with a 0.4 drop the prior month. The core up 0.2 compared with flat reading. That's a revision upward for the month. But
For dere tar litt gevinst her, for jeg er jævla feit gevinst nå. Folk er tjukke i huet. Folk skjønner jo ikke at det er dårlig tall. Det skal jo stupe på dette her.
So definitely progress on the factory gate prices. Jobless claims also feeding into that. Maybe we're done for the Fed because the labor market's getting looser theory.
At det ikke faller mer er jo helt galskap.
From an unrevised 242, so a jump of
That's a jump.
20,
Jump's the right word, right?
Det stopper opp. Folk er dumme. Folk er hjerneskada. Ta gevinst. Tok den sinnssyke treden. Den var faen meg bra, ass. Jones, du er meg faen meg fin her. 5000 kroner. Og så kommer den opp fordi folk er så tjukke i huet, liksom. De er så tjukke i huet. Bare, oh, let's buy! It's shitty numbers! It can't get any worse! Let's just buy! Bare assholes.
Factors are in place for disinflation, right?
Well, yes, you can say we're seeing disinflation. It's just a slow process.
Se, nå kommer den opp. Folk er idioter.
Is Jay Powell's indicator of core services, ex-housing, because we're
Folk er
waiting
dumme i huet.
to start dropping. It did not.
Oh, but it wasn't that bad.
Once that does,
Tok gevinst der nede. Boom! Fordi folk er tjukke i huet.
I'm not going to mince words. Markets moving here. The 10-year yield 3.36%.
Okay, motherfuckers.
The 2-year yield to 4 digits 3.8266%. The only word Vince Scully helps out here. Remarkable to see that this morning. This is well timed. Sometimes, we think, let's get John Riding on. He's with Brain Capital. He has worked tours of duty with the Federal
I just
Reserve
don't get it.
System and
Why the
also
fuck do
with
people
the
buy
Bank of
shitty
England.
numbers? It's just
And then
insane.
you just plain get lucky. Joining us now, John Riding on his Bank of England. Citigroup comes out, they say we got it wrong.
Fuck it.
We were calling recession doom and gloom, and
I'm
Europe,
gonna make money,
Kingdom,
so I just short it
looks more
again.
resilient. Do you buy the resilience?
The UK is a small open economy, and what happens in the rest of the world is going to be very important for the UK. I'm
Learn your numbers. Det alt jeg har å si.
I think the full impact of adjustments post-Brexit, that's still out there for the UK. But what I'm more skeptical about is decline in inflation, where the inflation rate in the UK is currently 10.1%. And within a couple of years, they're down to basically 1%. And I don't see how you get that kind of inflation drop with an interest rate of 4.5%. I'd be very surprised if in the US we're above 5%. We've got to, and the inflation problem is not as bad as in the UK. That there's more rate hikes than the market has priced in.
You are the single best person I know in the world qualified for this delicate question. I began this morning with Jeffrey Yu. I was thunderstruck by what the PhD from Stanford, Hugh Hill, said this morning about begging United Kingdom people to spend less money. It reminded me back to the 30s, Clement Attlee, the elites telling United Kingdom, please don't spend money. I'm absolutely, the
Jeg ute, ferdig. Jeg gidder ikke mer. Jeg gir meg. Nå er folk idioter. Jeg venter til USA åpner. Jeg har tatt masse gevinst nå. Dratt inn nesten 6.000 kroner. Veldig fornøyd med det. Gidder ikke sjanse før klokken er 3:30. Jeg gir ikke trade på idioter. Jeg gir ikke tape penger for folk er tjukke i huet. Så da venter jeg til USA åpner, så kan folk kjøpe her nede og... Jo, men jeg gir ikke samurai, for jeg gjorde den feilen i går. Jeg tjente så mye penger i går, og så bare ble jeg sittende og klarer ikke å holde fingrene unna fatet. Jeg må trade etter reglene mine. Og hvis jeg følger reglene mine, så har jeg tjent 1 million på under en måned. Jeg gidder ikke tape penger for at folk er idioter. Ok da, motherfucker, du overtalte meg. Helvete mer, samurai.
Okay, well, just because of time, John, I want to bring this over, and you know, we're talking here, folks, about a middle 20th century.
Hvis jeg taper nå, samurai, så skylder jeg på deg.
Do you sense a Keynesian tilt at the federal system of the United States? Do they have illusions of a demand side ordering of people to spend less money here, or are we to a new regime in America?
Well, that's exactly what the Fed's trying to do. But what has prevented monetary policy from biting on the economy was all of the fiscal injections, the income support provided during the pandemic, which ended up in people's bank accounts. So at the peak, people had $2.5 trillion more in aggregate in their bank accounts than they would have had there not been a pandemic. So it's very hard to slow the economy down on the consumer side. It's much easier on the housing side.
Given the stimulus, well, Olivia Blanchard calls it the Biden stimulus. Do you and Conrad DeQuadros suggest we've run out the stimulus and now we're back to some form of normal American economy?
I don't think we've run out all the stimulus. It's probably close to $1 trillion still of excess savings, but we have seen an adjustment in the savings rate, which is still lower than one would expect. Given where inflation is, given where interest rates are, people are still spending more than you would expect, given fundamentals, because of these excess savings they have.
I got 30 seconds. Do you have a recession call?
I think that in both the UK and the US it's inevitable, but not imminent. The inversion.
Ta gevinst. Nå gir jeg meg. Det for choppy. Det for choppy. Jeg tror det skal falle masse mer. Det for choppy. Det kan sprette rett opp igjen. Jeg logger meg for noen kasino.